You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
A few years ago, I made a really conscious decision about my style. Like, I think a lot of people, at least for me, when I first graduated college, I was like overwhelmed by all these little silly things in the working world. Like, how do you sign off an email? How do you talk to people? How do you address people? Just like the normal office etiquette. But then also, like, what do you wear to work? And then, most places don't have a uniform. It's not like I'm working at Pennzoil and I've got my name tag on. Like, I kind of have some flexibility with what I wear. So do I wear a suit and a necktie? Do I wear Sperry's every day? Like, there's all these different ways to have style that fits within the business casual world. And so I tried like a lot of things. I tried like pocket squares. Don't think that fit me at all, my personality. And then something occurred to me one day. I said, I'm not going to wear anything that I think is cool. And some of you are listening to this and you're like, you've succeeded, Sanger. You're not cool at all. But I would say to that, good. Like, I didn't want to be cool. Why did I not want to be cool? Well, I wanted to become someone. I had this vision of who I wanted to grow into, who I wanted to become, both personally and professionally, that was motivated by outcomes, was motivated by the impact I could have on others, not the perception of others. I didn't want to be motivated by what other people thought of me. I didn't want to be motivated by status. I wanted to be truly motivated by what I could do for other people, how good I could do my job, not by how cool I looked. And so I wanted to reject cool. So it became a very easy filter for me. If I thought something looked cool, I wouldn't wear it. Like, a little bit paradoxical, maybe. I think it's cool, so I can't wear it. But I was like, cool is not what I'm going for. I'm not cool. I don't want to be someone who's overwhelmed by status or who's motivated by image or who cares a lot about what other people think. Now, maybe other people, I'm not saying everybody wears a pocket square has an unhealthy relationship with his perception, in the minds of others. But for me, I did. So I wanted to reject that. And what was interesting is that at first it changed like very clear decisions that I would make about like what to wear or not wear, what to buy or not buy. But then over time, it changed my subconscious perception of myself. It changed small actions. It changed relationships. It changed how well I could connect or not connect with other people. And then it began to change me in a way that I didn't predict. And over time, I think that I hopefully have become more like the image that I had originally of someone who's motivated by the outcome of the work, who's motivated by the impact on other people. And I really don't care what other people think at this point in my life. I definitely used to, though. So that really highlighted for me the power of the conscious mind, the power of making an active choice, the power of being motivated by a clear and compelling vision, and then moving forward with that in such a way that everything else kind of follows, including the unconscious mind. So speaking of the distinction between conscious mind, unconscious mind, all the choices we have to make about both, our guest on the show, Dr. Caroline Leaf, is an expert in neuropsychology. And I mean, truly an expert. She is on the cutting edge of research in neurology going back into the 80s. She started her career as a communications pathologist, realized that a lot of communications issues, a lot of speech issues really had a root in neuroscience. So she started to dive deep into neuroscience, has become one of the leading neuroscientists in the field, have done a lot of groundbreaking work, and she's spread her knowledge throughout the world. She's got 19 books in 24 languages, 1 million followers or close to it on Instagram. So she's having an amazing impact. And today she's here to have an impact with you and me. So if you stick around, you're going to hear some fantastic stories. You'll get a lot of great wisdom from Dr. Leaf, and you'll walk away, hopefully, with a renewed understanding of how you can change your beliefs for the better. I'm Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly. So, Dr. Leaf, we were talking before we started recording about family business. I obviously work with my dad. I grew up, I jokingly say as an indentured servant in his business until I was an adult. And then I wisely chose to continue that. And your family works together too. What went into the decision to bring your kids into the family business?
Well, it was actually their decision. So what started off, I've been in this for 40 years, so it's quite long. And initially I ran a private practice and my husband was doing was doing all the sort of books and the financial side for me. And then he got more and more involved. He had his own company and then we moved to the United States 16 years ago. And he actually then came on as our CEO when we moved here because my business just got so big. We needed someone to run it. So he came on and then he was working and running things and needed help. And so our eldest daughter had finished her degree and was interested. So she came on and she had been doing some stuff part time. And then the other daughter finished her degree and she decided she worked for somewhere else first for UTA in California. And then she came on board. And then our other daughter, and then our son, and so they all C suite and they all just chose to. We never asked any of them, but it's been the most amazing experience because they are very committed and they know me and they love it. And it's not without its challenges, but it's a privilege to be able to talk to my kids daily as a mom, but also as a business owner and their boss, which is funny, although I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder who the boss is.
Yeah. Do you find that they respond to you in a way that is different than they would if they were not related to you? Like in their role as an employee, do they communicate with you differently than because you're their mother?
Oh, I think we've had to work around those things. They feel like, for example, when we're doing podcasts and doing various different things, there's definitely, oh, come on, mom, don't do that again, or say that better. Or it's definitely more relaxed. And there can be more friction sometimes, because they could say things in a way that, well, they wouldn't say that to someone else in that way or that tone. So that does happen, but very seldom. That's something that we catch quickly. Obviously, you are more relaxed with your family, so you can get maybe a little irritated more quickly, but that's where the decision making comes in. So you can decide to, get irritated and frustrated, or you can decide to say, okay, well, let's put that aside for a moment. We've stepped out of the barrier of work and we've stepped into family zone. We have to consciously saying and make the decision, which I'm sure you do, is make the decision that let's get professional, let's handle the business stuff, let's put the frustration aside, let's use kindness as our currency. We've got a lot of little tools and things that we bring into play, and it works really well. But we have a lot of fun together, so that helps.
Similar experience for my dad and I. I was late into my college experience before I realized I was working for my dad through all of college, but I hadn't really decided that that was what I was going to continue to do until maybe I was a few months away from graduating. And probably the single biggest lesson that I learned in college happened as just this offhand remark in one of my senior level classes. This class, like all semester, every week, the professor would bring in a former student who was running their own business. And this guy came in on random Tuesday and was like, "Yeah, I work with my dad. This is how it's going, da 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 da, whatever." And he goes, "By the way, if you ever work with your parents, call them by their first name. Don't call them mom and dad." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I need to start doing that." And it was like, as soon as I started doing that, we solved a lot of those problems where we would maybe talk to each other the way we probably wouldn't if we weren't related inside the business. I remember one time we were screaming and yelling at each other in the hallway, and somebody comes from the complete other side of the office. I mean, this is a big office. It
Yeah.
comes all down this long hallway. It's like, y'all need to chill out. Like, go in there, lock the door. What are you doing? And it struck us because both my dad and I, even though we were screaming at each other, we were like, we're fine. We're not mad. We were just, he had to be a little bit stronger. I was being more bold with him
Yeah.
because I could get away with it. And he was being a little more disciplinarian with me because he was my dad. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I love seeing successful family businesses and then navigate those intrapersonal dynamics because they can be challenging, but if you overcome them and you learn how to navigate them, you can unlock something really special. Because to your point, who's going to be more committed to the success of the enterprise than your family?
Absolutely, and I love what you do. You're totally correct there. They are so committed. I mean, it's their inheritance, and who understands me better than my kids who've grown up with this. So it's really they are very invested in the concept and things as well, and that's what we put first. We put the message first. But you're quite right. I mean, we've had times where there's been yelling going on. Where we've had to say, okay, let's end the Zoom meeting because my kids are all over the place, or let's all cool down before we carry on. But as you quite rightly say, sometimes those heated discussions is still going to be fine. There's a
Yeah.
level of, hey man, that's irritating. Yeah, and which you wouldn't do if there was someone around. And if there are external people in the meeting, obviously we control that. But if someone sees that from the outside, they, as you said, they may think that there's something really bad, but it's not. It's just that family dynamic that's maybe got a little heated up, and everything's going to be fine afterwards, and you carry on moving forward. And but for outside of that can be, and we've had sometimes people saying things like, wow, you seem to be getting slightly irritated, or there'd be a comment, meanwhile say, oh, were we? Oh, didn't know. Okay, sorry. Well, we're fine, we know what we're doing, and that kind of thing. And then you mentioned about the mom dad situation. That is so true. In fact, one of our daughters, Dominique, who's actually overseas, she's our COO, she actually said we need to do this, and she calls me Caroline and Mac and she calls my husband Mac in meetings, and it works really well. Now the others have followed suit, and especially when we're in a meeting with other people, that was a good decision. You're quite right, it shifts the
Yeah.
dynamic, and it helps us to keep everything. This is about the business, this is about making decisions about what we need to do now, and then also helps us separate because we work together all the time. We talk all the time. We have to make the decision to also know how to disengage and not talk about business over dinner or when you're on holiday, that kind of thing.
Yeah, even when I'm not in the office, if I'm talking about work, in my head, my dad is Sean. He's not dad, right? So sometimes it'll be a funny situation. Maybe my sister or my mom or somebody in the family who is not in the business will ask me about how work's going. And I'm like, oh, well, Sean and I are working on XYZ. And they're like, huh? I go, oh, yeah, dad. Yeah.
I
Like,
know it
but
is.
I'm so committed to it that even though it doesn't make sense for me to say it to them, I still can't help it.
It's so good though, but I agree with you. It's a good practice because it does help create that separation, and it does help keep you very focused.
I want to get to the work that you do on neuroscience in a second, but I have one more family business question.
Go for it.
For any of your children, how did they handle the perception, whether from others or for themselves, of nepotism? Because I know what I've done, but I'm interested to hear how it's impacted them.
I think that the fact that they chose to come in as opposed to us bringing them in automatically, they all went out, got their degrees, did their own thing for a while, and then made the decision to come in and sort of tried it. It's like they earned their position. It wasn't that they just automatically were given a job because they happened to be my child. They
Yeah,
actually had to find their way, see where they could fit in, show that they could do the job, and that has helped really well. Also, we do contract out most of our other work, so that makes it a lot easier
that
to have
helps.
contractors as opposed to we've had full-time employees, and just the nature of our business because we need bigger services like software development, so that kind of thing. So it's actually easier to contract out, and that way makes it much easier. So the nepotism, maybe it's almost like a situation in our business that doesn't really apply because of the fact that we do mostly contract work. That's, as I said, contractors that do all our big stuff, all the accounting and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's they earned their way. They wanted to come in. They didn't just automatically get the job. They had to work their way up the ranks. They had to work hard to show that they could do. We taught our kids from young to work hard, that you don't just have all this stuff because you've got it. That work ethic was ingrained from very young. They've seen Mac and I work really hard over the years. So it was very natural for them. They're very hardworking. I mean, I have to tell them, okay, take a break. Let's not work on weekends. Unless there's a function or something like that.
I think that the role of the parent, I haven't been the parent in a family business yet, but I've been the second generation. And if you give them something they don't deserve, if you give your children something they don't deserve, like they'll know it, and so will all of your other team. If you give them something they have earned or they are capable of, in my experience, there's something that at least I had to grapple with in my situation. I was like, well, am I capable of this role? I'm capable of it. I'm succeeding, I think. Would I have been in this exact position at this exact company if not for my relationship with the founder? Yeah, probably not. I might have worked somewhere else, maybe doing the same thing, but I'm here obviously because I want to work with my dad. And I remember one time I hired an advisor. He was working with us for about a year, and he comes into my office one day. We didn't have a lot of contract work. All our employees were W-2 employees. He comes in, and he totally did not mean any offense by this. And he was like 15 years older than me, by the way. So I'm maybe 25, and like I'm his boss, right? He comes in and he goes, How much do you think nepotism had a role in you being in this position? And I was like, I was so taken aback by the question because it was so bold, right? It's like, wow,
Yeah.
you're really asking that? And I said, well, probably most of it. Like I just said, well, I'm going to embrace this. Go, sure. And now what? And we're in the same spot we were before you asked the question. So, and he was like, fair. He told me like, yeah, you can't run from it. Hey, there's this is where I am. I have more advantages than some and fewer advantages than others. And that's just
Well, there is
how
a
it's shaken
balance.
out.
Yeah, as you said, it's some you have more, you have less. It's a difference. There's more. There's going to be a higher expectation from your dad towards you. So the fact that you've got to that position, and not in every case, but if you obviously there and you staying and you've been there for a while and you're successful, that person over time obviously saw, hey, listen, you really are worthy of that position. But at the time, that's their perception. And you're not going to change that
Yeah.
perception until
He
you
didn't know.
actually exactly. And then why do that whole persuasion and get it's not even so I love your answer. I think that was brilliant.
He told me a few years later, like, that really like changed my respect level for it. So I had no idea at the time it made any difference, but apparently it stuck with him and it stuck with me too. So I thought it was funny.
Very funny. That's so good. That's so good. I can see my one daughter's answering like that. If she was we have had some full-time employees as well at certain points, and you can they were because we're small, and we formed a internal team is small, and we formed very good. We have such a great. They can see the family dynamic is fiery, be Italian and whatever, but very close, and they felt they were part of a family. So maybe behind our back they may have said something, but to our face, it really was working very well. So, but yeah, I can imagine in a bigger organization that could be seen as an issue.
Yeah. So before you dove deep into neuroscience, you're a communications pathologist, and you kind of started to recognize that speech issues had a lot to do with neuroscience. What caused that revelation for you?
Such a good question. So I did communication pathology and audiology, which is different to speech pathology. It was a very interesting degree because we actually were trained in the hospitals with the medical students. And there's two different ways you can approach this kind of field. Speech pathology is working brilliant degree, but it's working that generally they will also work in hospitals, but they don't generally get the training in the neuroscience and the neurology and medicine. We had to do 2 years of medicine. So it's a slightly different approach. And so I was exposed immediately to neurology, to neuroscience, to a very medical approach, to a very biological approach. As I said, our first 2 years were with the med students, which your standard speech pathology doesn't do. So that gave me a different type of exposure. Also, I did an experimental degree. There's only 60 of us that qualified in the world. And then they changed it. They kind of combined 7 years into 4 years and brought in the medicine side, brought in all the speech pathology, brought in the audiology, and they crammed in all of the stuff. We were getting the psychology, we were getting the language, we were getting the communication, we were getting the neuroscience, we were getting the medicine. Phenomenal training. Exhausting though, because we had to go into pretty much work 6.5 days a week in the hospitals and clinics and that kind of thing. But it opened my mind to answer your question. It opened my mind to seeing the link between not just biology, because if I just did medicine, which I was going to do and got into, I would have been very biologically focused and maybe neuroreductionistic. Having the other component added, the psychological component and the communication component, opened my mind to mind and showed me the link between the mind brain body connection. So I was very fortunate there, and it enabled me to do some of the first neuroplasticity research in the world back in the late 80s, where we didn't even talk about neuroplasticity at that stage. It was considered that the mind is separate from the brain, and the brain, once it's damaged, couldn't change. It was fixed. And I
Hmm.
challenged that, and I was in an environment that enabled me to challenge that. So I managed to do research with people that had severe traumatic brain injury and show that they could change. If you change your mind, you can change your brain. So that was very exciting. And I think it's those fields that crossed that opened my mind to a whole different viewpoint.
I imagine at that time there were people that were skeptical as you're doing this research. We had this ingrained belief that the mind and the brain are totally separate. You can't change the brain. What was the wh- what was most convincing in converting the skeptics?
So there was skepticism, so much skepticism. just very quickly, in the 80s, they still saw the mind and brain as separate. So for many years, it started changing around the 90s. From the 90s to now, the mind and brain are often seen as, most of the time, were seen as the same thing. And that's very unfortunate because they are totally different. So the advantages of the 80s, when I was doing my initial degrees, was that there was an understanding that there's the mind and there's the brain. The disadvantage was that they didn't believe the brain could change. Now, from the 90s to now, there is the disadvantage of people seeing the mind and the brain as the same, neuroreductionism, which is a huge problem, and we can talk about why. But there is the understanding that the brain can change. There's almost like, I've gone through this evolution in my career because it's been this shift has happened over these 40 years. So when I was sitting in a neuroscience lecture. Now at that stage, neuroscience wasn't really used. It was more neurology that we used. Neuroscience is very much a word that came through from the sort of more fixed from the 90s, once MRI technology was advanced and so on, developed. And I remember being in a neurology slash neuroscience lecture with all the med students, and they were telling us about once you have brain damage from car accidents or trauma or a tumor or something like that, your brain couldn't change. And I remember putting up my hand and asking the professor, but that doesn't make sense because as humans, we grow, we change, we have experiences, we're different. And people do heal from strokes and from, heart attacks and from injuries. People see, and we're always changing. And so he very sarcastically, I'll never forget this because, the 80s science, female, whatever, said, oh, well, go do research. And my innocence of youth, I said, sure, I will, because we had to set up our theses anyway for our big research study. And I said, what do you recommend? And he said, well, go and study traumatic brain injury. Now, I did know, but didn't know what I know now. But in the 80s, there was very little research on traumatic brain injury. The reason being is that they took, well, why waste time studying brain injury? Because once it's damaged, the brain is damaged. So there wasn't much research on it. And that's why he kind of said, kind of threw me out there to the wolves and said, well, do something that's a waste of time. And that's what he thought. But I did. And I worked with people that had literally been written off as vegetables and then recovered level of function. I mean, that's what they used to say. And thank God they don't say that anymore. But a lot of neurologists would say that kind of thing back in the 80s if someone had a severe car accident or been in a coma for longer than 8 hours. So I worked with someone who actually approached me, who heard about my research, whose daughter had a terrible car accident and was in a coma for nearly 8 months and then came around and was functioning at about a second grade level, but she was already supposed to be in her final year at school, going into
Mm.
the beginning of her final year at school. So I was very nervous because I had just been started this idea and started working on some ideas and working on the research. But took her on, long story short, is that I worked with her for 8 months. And to your question, what evidence really changed people's minds? I didn't even know what was going to happen. I worked with her 3 hours a week for 8 months, and her goal and her family's goal was for her to get back and finish school. Now, this is someone who started with me at day one who couldn't even cope on a second grade level. So I had no idea where this was going. I mean, really, and I said to him, I cannot guarantee anything. I thought probably what will happen is and these professors and my consultants and my all telling me, well, don't give too much hope. You don't want to give too much
Yeah.
hope just in case it doesn't work. And that's how I was trained. Be very clinical, be very distant, don't give too much hope. So whatever. Anyway, long story short, within 8 months, I was astounded. The techniques that I had developed, I then trained the student in and her family. And within 8 months, this girl went on to finish high school with her peer group, caught up. So caught up the time she had lost, caught up the academics that she had lost, finished school with better grades than what she was getting prior to her accident with brain damage, went
Wow.
on to get a degree. And, so it was just so astounding. Also, her cognitive and emotional and social, those things also improved. And I didn't directly work on those. I worked more on just helping her to academically, just to build memory and to learn again and to be able to think and process information. But it carried over into her social, emotional, cognitive. And then I worked with a lot of other patients, and I worked, and that just launched me into that line of work. And I showed the results to, we had external statisticians come in and check the work because the results seemed too good to be true. I had an incredible panel of professors working with me, and it was that convinced people. I mean, I still had some doctors that said to me, oh, it was luck. But luck didn't really, there obviously is an element of luck in everything. But this, I think the key thing, and this relates to the whole core of your podcast, which is decision making. There was a decision made by that young woman and her family that they were not going to give up. And I saw that with my patients over the years, that the choice to change, that decision to change, that is what motivates people. Anyone can change, anyone can improve. What level they'll get to is different for every person. But whether you are an addict, whether you are so depressed you can't function, whether you are the decision, you need help. I'm not trying to put it on the person, because when we are in situations of addiction and depression and so on, we always have to consider that the person is in an environment. So we always have to look at what is the person's environment, what caused this in the first place. So, so important. And we need to help people to see that they can choose. But the choice to make that decision to choose to move forward and to heal, that is very much up to the individual. And that's why I really love your podcast concept, because a huge part of my work has been to help people to choose. This is what I can do for you, but at the end of the day, this is what I can teach you, but at the end of the day, this is what I can help you with, but at the end of the day, you have to choose to do the work. And that's the difference I saw with the patients that really improved. And I can tell you 1,000 stories after that. I mean, I've got some great stories, but of when I worked in the townships in South Africa, because that's where I did a lot of work. I don't know if you want me to share some, just one, even one story.
Yeah, I would love to hear that.
Okay, so basically, parallel to doing this work with this young girl and in the very sort of clinically controlled laboratory sort of situation, I started working, getting invited to by our government. Then this was in the 80s. This was the apartheid era. I worked through the apartheid era, the transition, and then the post-apartheid with Mandela coming to power and everything changing. So our education system in South Africa at that stage, I grew up in South Africa, born in Zimbabwe, was shocking, as everyone pretty much knows. And so I was approached by government to help in the education situation, to try and help teachers, help these kids get more educated, change the systems and so on. And no one wanted the job, but I thought, well, this is great. I'll go do this. And, once again, young, innocent, so on. And I dived into this, and I worked 3 days a week for 25 years in the poorly performing areas, schools that had very little help and education, in areas that were so dangerous that if you drove through as a white woman, you would be killed. No one touched me. I could drive through 9 months pregnant and no one would touch me. And the reason why is, and in fact, I'd get escorts, was because they knew I was bringing a message of hope. That is, Sanger, where I realized that when you come with a message of love, in kindness and hope, and you show people that, listen, together we can actually, despite circumstances, we have this incredible power in our mind, and we can learn how to learn. We can learn how to manage our emotions. We can learn how to gain knowledge. We can learn how to process. These are skills that you can gain, and you can choose to then use them in your life. People respond to that. So one of the days was in one of the areas that I worked, and the conditions were shocking. So we would have like maybe one chalkboard if I was lucky, but generally newsprint on the walls and that kind of thing. And there would be supposedly 100 people, but 1,000, 2,000 people would turn up. And I mean, they would sit outside, and just to hear it was, I just can't even begin to tell you emotionally what it does for you when people are so desperate to learn. And I would teach for 5, 6 hours at a time. They wouldn't move. And one day I was explaining how the mind works and the brain works and how to learn and how to process emotions and all the different things that I teach. And one young girl, and there was like this interruption, and these teachers sort of said, they kind of called me out the room, and they said, this young girl really wants to come can she sit with you? And she had wrapped her in a blanket. What had happened was that she was bleeding terribly when she got there. And they thought it was her menstrual cycle, but she had actually been raped. She'd heard I was in town and was on the way to the class, to the schoolroom where I was teaching. And she got raped on the way, but she was determined to get there, and basically literally picked herself up and ran to the school. And obviously they wrapped her up in a blanket and wanted to take her to the hospital, but she wouldn't go. And she literally, wrapped in a blanket, sat at my feet. I mean, it makes me quite emotional when I think of this. She sat at my feet and she would not move. I mean, she literally sat right there. I mean, I put my arm around her and she then just sat with me and everyone just cheered her. And it was to see that. And she sat through 5 hours. And, so it was just those kinds of things that just made me realize that no matter what the circumstances are, when we create that environment that help people to realize how powerful the mind is and how your brain doesn't control you, your body doesn't control you, your circumstances impact you, but you can, as an individual and as a collective community together, use the power of your mind to actually learn and do the best you can in any circumstance. That message is full of hope. And that's what drove me to carry on researching. I still research, I run clinical trials, I still publish, I write books, I do everything I can now to help people understand this process.
The message that you're sharing is reminding me a lot of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, in that hope is very powerful in changing our physiology, but delusional hope is unhelpful, and hope tied to specific outcomes that don't get met is unhelpful too. Like he wrote of the prisoners who, oh, we're going to get out on Friday, we're going to get out on Friday, and then Friday would come, they're not out, boom, they would just lose everything. So how do you balance that with patients who may be inclined to, I can understand how someone who maybe they don't have any hope at all, but now the introduction of hope is helpful. If somebody has delusional hope or hope tied to specific outcomes that we can't guarantee at the beginning, how do you deal with that?
So that's such a great question, and I love Viktor Frankl's work too. And I think that if I may answer that from two angles, first of all, our current zeitgeist is such a one of such high productivity that you've got to produce, and the whole positive psychology, and it's put so much pressure on people and hasn't enabled people to really be who they are, and it's created a false perception. I often get asked about manifesting, and we hear that law of attraction, and we hear these principles that are so-called hope. If I'm hopeful and if I'm positive, I'm going to generate all this great stuff in my life. But it's kind of become distorted because there's reality. The reality is that life is hard. You're going to face tragedy. Emotions like depression, sadness, anxiety, trauma, tragedy, these things are all part of being a human, and we have to embrace them and process them to go through them. The hope, probably, to sum up the balance, I interviewed someone called Edith Eiger, I think it's her last name. She's a concentration camp survivor. She's in her mid-90s, incredible woman. And she was a ballerina and was put in the concentration camp. Her and her sister, her parents were, killed the first day, and that kind of in the gas chambers. And she still to this day builds hope in people's lives. She survived, became a psychologist and whatever. And we actually discussed this very topic. And she said that she would be in the midst of the most terrible torture. And in her mind, what she did was she realized internally that you can touch my physical body, but you cannot touch me in my soul. And that I actually feel sorry for you. And she didn't say this out loud to them. She was saying it to
Mm,
herself. It's me, the person, the soul. The physical is temporary, and it's terrible. It doesn't justify anything. And she didn't know if she was going to make it. But the way she got through each day was to go in and understand who she was as a person and her soul. And I think that's what Viktor Frankl was trying to help people to realize, is that these things can happen to you. But at the end of the day, like Edith said, that those people, she feels more sorry for them, because for someone to do that to another human, they've lost their vision of who they are. So it's a hope is a realistic hope. Like that patient I had, I didn't know what I was going to get to. So I said, this is a journey we go on together. A lot of the work I have done is to try and understand, how long does it take to actually create change in our lives. So, very common concept of habit formation, and that's been really, people are very into habit formation, but there's been relatively little research actually on it, and that's one of the areas that I decided to research, and it relates to this whole point of balancing hope. And what I saw from just for us to develop the ability to change is that we're not going to change in 1 day, 14 days,
yeah.
21 days. It takes cycles of 63 days minimum. It's about 3-month cycles for a full rewiring of a network of mind connection, which is energy to the networks in the brain and the body, for change to actually manifest. So there's a journey we go along. So in terms of balancing hope, it's for people to understand that, okay, let's be realistic about, let's take each day at this time and understand that we're going to be different in about 3 months' time. What that difference is, I don't know. Yes, you can have a goal, but you need a possibilities mindset. You need flexibility, that what's realistic right now in this moment, what are you hoping for? And then let's get the whole spectrum in between. And then so you're prepared with a possibilities mindset. So possibilities is based on probabilities, and possibilities are more fixed than a probability. So the probability, if you think of a wave in water, a wave builds, and there's all these water droplets, and there's a probability wave of things that can happen in our life. But to keep moving forward, because the wave will move forward and will crash, you can narrow it down to, okay, there's all these probabilities, but I can't consider 5 million things. I'm a human. I need to just maybe select 7 or 10 possibilities that could come out of these probabilities. So when we create possibilities, probabilities, and expectation mindsets, we can then balance that. Now, when we take that and you balance it with understanding who I am and my soul is, or spirit, or I call it the non-conscious in science, if we understand the uniqueness of me and that strength, plus I balance it with the possibilities and probabilities, that combination I found really, I'm giving big words, but we do that in a simple way with my patients and obviously whatever, that brings in a very good balance with hope. Does that make sense?
100%. That totally does. We have a lot of similarities in the way that through our practice we interact with our clients and patients, because I've always held the belief that goals alone are not enough. Goals alone are a great starting point and they're not the ultimate aim. When I have someone who comes in, they want to improve their life and their relationship with their money, it's not as simple as, well, I want to retire at 60. Like, that's not a goal alone. Should not be the ultimate aim. It's informed by a higher aim. And if you have a higher aim that's very clear, then a goal can measure your progress toward that aim. But without that higher aim, a goal it's empty.
I so agree with you, and I've had so many discussions like this with people, and because we really are in a goal orientated productivity, and people don't enjoy the journey. And I know there's a lot of awareness about this and trying to change it, but people are like vision boards or whatever. There's always that one end thing, or maybe two end things, and then there's so much distress around trying to get there, and it takes time, and then people lose hope or whatever, all this kind of thing. Same with healing from anything. It does take time, but you've got to be open and flexible. And it's this cognitive inflexibility, or this non-conscious mind inflexibility. Well, I should say conscious mind, not non-conscious mind, because the non-conscious mind is very flexible. That keeps people very stuck. And I don't practice anymore, but that's one of the things that was huge in my practice, was helping people to get unstuck. Now we just reach people around the world through the platforms that I have. But it's still a very, very common question, that how do I keep my hope balanced? It's like people have taken hope and think, okay, that's one thing at the end. And it's very, very physically driven often, financial or a job position or whatever. But sometimes it's not necessarily how many likes you have on Instagram. It's you being you. It's how many people you've affected and that kind of thing. But you got to help people get there.
Yeah, and a lot of times a belief change, not just in the introduction of hope in and of itself, but a belief change more broadly or in some other area, is required in order to effectively pursue the goal that was important in the first place. And I find
Exactly.
that that's very difficult to change, and people left to their own, I mean, me included, are not inclined to really examine their beliefs. Most people don't make their decisions in life thoughtfully, the big ones or the small ones, with as much thought as is required. People might very easily see the line between here and a tangible goal that I can identify. But creating a clear and compelling purpose for moving in that direction, a lot of times once we do that, I realize that, hey, there's a belief system that we need to change. You talk about this 3-month period where the change in mindset's like really clear. I feel like I've experienced something along those lines very recently, where I completely changed my like outlook on day-to-day moments once my son was born. And here's what happened. I'm in a group for business owners where we meet once a month and we talk about what's going on in our life, in our family, and in our business, both the highs and the lows. And the concept is like, we have a space where we can share with people without judgment. We're not going to get advice, but we can share a little bit more freely than we would with maybe our friends or family or employees. And I noticed something about myself after doing this for like 6 years, which is that almost every month I would come with a bunch of negative. Like, I would share 3 things that would all be negative. And when my wife was pregnant, I said to myself, I don't want to be one of those parents that complains about being a parent. I don't want to complain when it's time to change his diaper. I don't want to complain when he's making me lose sleep, etc. So I committed myself. I said, I will not complain about anything to other people or to myself. And that meant that I couldn't just not complain, because sometimes an event is so powerful that it like demands a reaction out of
Yeah.
you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, I can't just ignore the bad things that happen, or in other words, maybe the challenging things if I remove the judgment. They said, I'm going to embrace them. And so, like, right away, we spent a week in the NICU. And we don't know during this period, like, when we're getting out. It was like
Yeah.
every 6 hours. Are we getting out? Are we getting out? Are we going to get to go
Mm.
home? We had no idea. We didn't really know what was wrong with him. We didn't know why we were there. It was really, really challenging and difficult
Challenging, I
time.
can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. And during that period, my wife's physically recovering. So she is in a wheelchair. So I've got to wheel her around to do anything. I've got to feed myself, everything too. I've got to wheel her to take a shower. And then if she needed something as simple as the breast pump or the bottle, I'd have to do that. I had to take all of them apart and wash them by hand in this like sink that had me hunched over. It was a horrible like faucet situation. So it was like cramping my back. And I remember like a couple days into this, the old me would have just been complaining. Like everything is going exactly the opposite of how I want, right? I've had probably a collective 35 minutes of sleep. I'm doing just mundane like chores every 2 hours. I'm taking this bottle apart, washing it, wheeling my wife over there to grab it, wheeling her to the bathroom. I don't even have time to like feed myself or go to the shower or whatever. And I I'm like, this reaction, this response is being demanded of me to the situation. And I said, wow, I'm so thankful, because I've never had an opportunity to sacrifice this much for anybody else in my life. And he's 3 months old now. It turned 3 months like a week and a half ago. And I realized like my whole life has changed. My whole outlook has
Mhm.
changed, because I don't complain when those things happen. When he wakes up at 2 in the morning, I don't go, ugh. I go, yay, I get to go
Exactly.
change his diaper.
And I love that. And congratulations on your baby. And yeah, having gone through 4 kids, it's not easy, but it's wonderful. And it's your attitude and decision of how that is a mind decision. And that mind then, it's not your brain that's doing it. Your mind does everything. And you've got different levels of mind. And you made a decision in your mind. And then that decision you wired in and to the mind brain body connection. So you first made that decision, the child's coming, you've got all that information, and what happens is our mind is all around us and through us, and it's a gravitational field, and there's a whole physiology to it, there's a whole psychology to it, but it's not your brain. It drives your brain. Your mind is 99% of who you are, and your brain and body are only 1%. And this is really great news, because it means that what you've just described in the story that you've given is you could have literally wired in a negative or a positive way of looking at the
Hmm.
situation. And so the information comes into the mind first, and then you make a decision consciously, driven by the non-conscious, which is your biggest part of you, to be positive or negative. And the easiest way to understand this is, think of how raindrops form a cloud. All the drops are the information about your child and what could happen, and all the caring that's needed, and so on, and the experience and everything. That's all forming into a cloud, which is a thought about your child. Every experience we have every day is coming in like that. All the details are the little raindrops forming these clouds. So we form all these clouds. 95% of what we expose to every day is forming into these clouds in our mind. Our mind then takes these and consciously processes them, like makes copies of them, literally makes copies and puts them into the brain. And then that stimulates the brain to respond on a neurochemical level. And then they get built into the networks of the brain and into the body. So it's not just the brain. So we form a mind, brain, body wide network. And if you just say once, I'm not going to complain, that whole thing happens, but one day of that is not enough. You had to practice. So
Yeah.
now your child's 3 months old, and you have practiced and set up that network. So every drop that's added of experience of you with your child, every time they wake up, every time, all the things that happen being a parent, that cloud is a nice healthy looking cloud, and the copies that are being made and added to the network are healthy. And over time it becomes automatized, which means that it goes into the non-conscious part, which is the biggest part of you, that's beyond space and time, that is where perfect wisdom is, where everything that we need is inside of that, scientifically researched. That then, once the network is in there and stabilized in there, then that drives your behavior. So now your behavior is one of, whatever this child does, it's a privilege to be this child's dad. And it doesn't matter whether they wake you up 10 times a night. You are loving that moment. You're learning from that moment. You're learning each, whatever, whatever, whatever. So it's the whole learning and growing in a direction, and we can direct those directions. That's directed neuroplasticity, which is so great. Now, you could have started complaining, and you could have realized that the complaining was not working and it was creating problems and friction and making it very difficult and negative. You could still stop that and rewire that network. It's harder, but you can still do that. So that's where there's hope. That's also where there's hope that we can get stuck in a pattern of that's come from our mind first and then wired into the brain, because the brain and body just do what the mind tells it to do. But then we can choose to say, okay, well, this is just messing up my life. I mean, the signals of my life are I'm unhappy, life sucks, my body's sore, whatever. I don't like this. So I can to make a decision to say, okay, this far and no further. And then I can go through the hard work of the healing journey, which is up and down. One day you'll feel great, and the next day you won't feel so great. And there's a whole pattern that I've identified in my research that we published on that can prepare you for the ups and downs of that journey, so you don't get caught and stop too soon and think, okay, I've got this, when you don't have it. Maybe, like, for example, day 28 into the healing journey, which is 4 weeks into making a change in your life. If you suddenly stop because you can get this feeling of, I got this, that's how you feel. 4 weeks in, generally, one feels quite good. But there's a massive dip that comes just after that. So one little thing that throws you off can throw you right back to the beginning. But if people know that, they're prepared for that, they can move forward. The continued good decisions can continue if people understand the ups and downs of change.
Yeah, definitely was not all at once, but a gradual change that at this point feels like I've arrived and this is easy now. Not finished, but I'm at the point that I had imagined.
You're on a roll. And you said, it's easy now. And you said something, it's not finished. Now, that's a really good combination. So, in the non-conscious mind, which is the third level, the main biggest level of our mind, there's 3 levels of mind. The non-conscious mind is where all our experiences are built in, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The non-conscious mind is always searching through that to find the disruptive stuff that is disrupting our functioning and the good stuff that's improving our functioning. And then it puts that into the subconscious like a waiting room. And then those come up slowly into our conscious mind. So there's a whole process. This goes on all day long. And then at nighttime, our unconscious drives. Now, to come back to this point where you said it's easy, but you're not finished. So that tells me that you have gone past that 3-month mark. You've wired a network in that the basic idea is that no matter what happens, you're going to handle it when it comes to the looking after your baby. And so that's the network that's driving. But you also, because when you have a network built in such a healthy way, you're very open to possibilities. So then I'm not finished. It's easier. It means it's automatized. So it's moved beyond the conscious level and it's moved into the non-conscious level. We won't do something until it's actually moved into the non-conscious level and become stabilized there. And that takes 3 months to get there. But then there's a wisdom attached to that. And the wisdom is, I've got to learn more. This is just the beginning. So it's not finished. So that statement, I've arrived, but it's not finished, is a very wise statement. That means something good is happening. I mean, this is an example of you and your baby in your life, but one can apply this idea to any decision.
Yeah,
Whether
anything, any belief change, any decision, anything we want to progress toward. I mean, in the beginning, it was something that I really had to consciously think about every
exactly.
time I woke up to change his diaper, or every time somebody would ask me, how's it going? And people would, not even on purpose, probably, but they would ask a question that the old me would have felt like was incapable of being answered any way other than negative. For example, they're like, you getting any sleep lately? It's like, well, of course, we all want to be getting a normal amount of sleep. So if you ask me, you getting any sleep lately? Kind of, you already know I'm not. Well, old me would be like, "Ugh, no." And now at the beginning, it was, I would have to pause and go, I'm not, with a smile on my face. Like, I'm not, but it's great. Like, because here's why. And now when people ask me, I just go, I like it. I don't even have to think about it. I immediately go, I'm not.
You did the work, it's automatized. So when we have, I keep mentioning we've got 3 levels of mind. So we've got the conscious mind, which is actually really slow, awake when you're awake, and it's where we do the work. It's kind of the part that is doing the work. So it's messy. And it should be, because these things are coming at us. We've got to try and work things out as they come along. We guided by our non-conscious. Our non-conscious is this infinite source of wisdom that we have where everything goes, and it's nothing weird. It's very scientific, and it's what everyone's belief is. You can believe it's the spiritual part of you, it's connected to the universe, God, whatever you want. But it's basically, we see that there is this lots of experiments since the 80s and work that other people have done, including myself, on the fact that we have this massive fast and unconscious that stores everything from in the womb to whatever age we at and whatever. And that is constantly looking, as I said, for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and trying to help us get rid of the bad and the ugly because those are disruptive, and then emphasize the good stuff. So consciously, you made the decision to consciously have a good attitude to this whole situation. So you made that decision. That was, you tuned in then to your non-conscious where wisdom is, and wisdom says, hey, listen, having a baby is the most amazing thing. It is hard work, but it's so worthwhile. So you tuned into that level of wisdom. So you bypassed, and you immediately consciously, because when people make good decisions that are wise, when people move forward in their life and make change, even if there's, it doesn't mean it's all hunky dory. We're not avatars. There's up and down. Embrace the pain, embrace the hard parts. That's part of it. Wisdom tells us, or wise decisions make us recognize that there are nights that you think, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I just do want to sleep. It's really hard. It'd be great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you've embraced it as, but this is part of it. I'm okay with this. I'm okay with being tired. I'm okay with maybe feeling groggy for a few hours. I'm okay with like watching over the baby because I want to make sure that everything's okay with the baby. I'm okay with that. It's not a negative thing, but it does make me feel tired. It does make me feel exhausted. That wisdom balance comes from when you access the wisdom of the unconscious. A lot of people stay stuck in just conscious decision making and ignore the wisdom of the unconscious, and then get into these patterns where they create these loops of negativity. And that breaks hope, and that creates these patterns of stuckness, which then lead to things like increased levels of anxiety and depression as a signal. But we can break those. At any point, we can break those. So the conscious mind, you make a decision, but then you tap into the unconscious, and then you work together with the unconscious over the process of time to create these new patterns. And that's the work that I've done, is to what do you do and all that stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot of power in that. And now I feel even more convicted to consciously decide what are the other beliefs that I have that are not helping me. I think at the onset, it was also really informed by a very clear vision of what I wanted and who I wanted to be. It wasn't just complaining is bad, so I don't want to complain. It was, there are people that I interact with that I would envy in a way. Like, how are they always happy? Yeah, why don't, what the heck? You know, I ask them how their day's going. It's always good and it seems genuine. It's not fake. I wish I was like that. And so I started to imagine what my life would be like if that was how I was. Who would I become? What would I do? How would I treat others? How would people treat me? And I could see myself doing it and being that way, even though I wasn't that way. So I had this vision of it, said, okay, well, the pathway to being that is to not complain. You know, the pathway to being like this vision that I have is to have gratitude. And so then it's the goal of, okay, every time I want to complain, I'm going to say one thing positive instead. Well, now I have the habit and I just stick to the habit. Eventually it's like you look around, I've kind of become something different.
There you go. You consciously made that decision, then you worked on it, and you kept adding to it every day. And that then strengthened that network, and you were tapping into the wisdom. And you said something also there that relates back to the very first question or second question you asked me around the hope thing, the balance, the realism. And my answer was, you've got to know who you are. It's so important that you understand who you are and what you want, your belief systems, your values, your soul, whatever you want to call it. And so just saying, I'm not going to complain is not enough. I just want that car. It's not enough. You have to, what is my value system? What are my beliefs? Why do I want to be this kind of father? What is it about this? Why do I want to? And then the whole concept of it's bigger than just the one thing with your child. It's as a person, you decide you don't want to be a complaining person because you see the negative effects and whatever. So it grows into other areas, but you had to work at that. That's where the neuroscience is. The neuroscience is what's happening in the brain and the body. And then there's the whole psychoneurobiology, which is the field I'm in. The whole psychoneurobiology link is what we're talking about here. So you with your mind drive the process. Your mind is fundamental. You made the decision. I'm not going to be a complaining dad. And then That then changed the energy in the mind, changed the energy in the brain and the body, and you drove it, you created. And that's the power that we have to create. But you had a possibilities mindset, and you had an expectation mindset, and you also understood who you made the choice to find out what your belief system was related to that. And that brings balance to the whole approach. You can't just manifest, this like overdone
No, just
manifest.
to like thinking about it and doing nothing doesn't get there. Just like having a goal alone without the vision doesn't get you there.
No, you got to have all the pieces in place, and you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You got to be okay with being sad and depressed or anxious. Or whatever. These are not bad things. These are all informational signals. And we're in a society today that is got to be happy all the time. And if you have some sadness, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Or meanwhile, that's not. That's very human. It's very normal to respond to adverse circumstances with sadness or whatever. And so there's a lot of distortion that distorts people's abilities to make decisions. So what I try and do with my work is to bring more clarity so that they can filter through and actually do what we're talking about now, is say, what do I need? What do I want? Who am I? People kind of need to get in touch with who they are.
Yeah, that who am I is man, I love that you say that because that's I think the first question we ought to ask, like who am I and also like who do I want to be? In my practice at Decidedly, we've identified there's 5 decisions you've got to make to transform your wealth to significance. The first one is decide who you are. From there, it's decide where you are, where you're going, how you're going to get there, and who matters. But it starts with who you are. And if you try to skip that step and go, well, where do I want to go? You might pick the wrong place. You might pick the wrong destination. A lot of times people start with, I bet you see this a lot. They start with the how question. They haven't even really identified where they want to go, much less where they are, and certainly not who they are. They start with how. Hey, doctor, what should I be doing to, recover from this stroke? Whoa, whoa, whoa. We got a lot of other questions before we get to that.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It others becomes just this empty box that looks like a gift, but it's not really. It's empty. It's got to have substance to it. And that's so important. I agree with that. Your mind is very deep. Your mind is fundamental. Your mind is not your brain. Your mind is deep, and it requires that kind of deep thinking, that kind of, let's ask these questions. Let's ask the right questions. Let's get ourselves in the right state so that we can actually then function, and then also deal with the fact that when something doesn't work out exactly, which is inevitable, some things you may have choose a pathway. Once you've got the what, who am I, and you start the how portions, the balance of your questions, being able to embrace the things that didn't work is it's okay if something didn't work, because it's not a failure. It's, what did I learn that didn't work? What can I get from that? That I have found absolutely critical with people in business, which I'm sure you have, with people just doing life, with people trying to heal from something, whether it's a major trauma or just whatever, is that when something doesn't quite work out and you've invested a lot of time in it, let's say from a business decision, and you in the how, and you thought this really seemed like the right decision, and then it didn't actually seem like it, then it turned out that that wasn't quite the right direction and you've got to redirect. Then people very often, I'm sure you've seen this, they'll get totally broken emotionally, and mentally there's a whole breakdown that happens in the mind, and they get stuck in the conscious mind worrying about, oh my gosh, I did this wrong, it was a mistake, I'm a failure. And they can get stuck there and look at social media, and I should be there, and I should be there, that goal. So they jump everything and go to that goal where I should be. But if you can rather say, okay, who am I? How does this align back with who I am? What did I learn from this? What did I learn not to do? That kind of thinking, even though we know we should do it, I don't find people doing it enough. And that's something that you literally have to teach people how to do. And that's part of, what I try and help people do, including myself.
Dr. Leaf, what is your top decision making tip for business owners?
The top decision making tip would be, to take your time and to make sure that you run through a process of making sure that you're very authentic. And that process, I would call, you can use it in so many different ways. It's called a neurocycle. And it is a way of getting your conscious mind to align with your subconscious and your non-conscious, where the wisdom is. And so it's basically, if you're about to make a decision, is you want to gather awareness of how you're feeling in this, what are your feelings around this decision? Where are you feeling this in your body? So you get yourself into the now moment. What is your perspective towards the situation? What's your mindset, your perspective, your attitude? And then what are your behaviors in this moment? So before you do anything, to take the time to sit back and gather awareness of those 4 factors. Then you got to reflect. A reflection is like shining a light through a prism. When you shine a light, a white light, it becomes a rainbow. There's depth. So once you've gathered awareness of those factors, your emotions, your behaviors, your perspectives, and where you're feeling this in your body, because of the whole psychoneurobiological way that we function as humans, that first step really helps you to bring yourself into the moment, helps to tap into the wisdom, helps to bring the balance and order out of chaos in the current multitude of decisions you have to make. Then the second step of reflection is to get that white light into that prism, the depth, and to find the depth of the rainbow. So it's a lot of who, what, when, where, why. So a lot of questioning, a lot of deep thinking, which will help you to respond versus react. Then write that down, mindstorm it. And whatever comes up, even if it seems unrelated, gather all that data. So those first 2 steps generate the third. And then with all this data, you then sit and you go through a reconceptualization. And this is all the data. Now what do I do? And then you lead to the action. And that process of 5 steps is called the neurocycle. And you can do that for decision making in the moment. You can do that within 63 seconds. You can arrest a potential toxic thought from going down the wrong way, or a potential argument from manifesting, or a potential negativity building in you that will block. Because the minute we're negative, we block wisdom. We get stuck in that loop of the conscious mind and the brain. We don't access our unconscious. So you can do these 5 steps in 63 seconds. You can do them in 10 seconds. You can do them. And then if you want to really rewire a network, you do those same 5 steps daily over 63 days. And I have a whole app and process and everything that can help people. But those 5 steps are a formula for how you can manage your mind. And when you manage your mind, you manage your decision making. A chaotic mind, a messy mind, is going to lead to messy decisions, which is going to lead to messy brain and body, which is going to lead to messy outcomes. So it's really to take the time to do that process, to apply a mind management formula, and that'll lead to unbelievable results with decision making.
I love that. I also love the mindstorm word that you put in there instead of brainstorm. There's so much that I wish that we could get into today that I'd love to hear your opinion on. But hey, you know what? We're just going to have to check out your book to dive deeper on those topics, which is coming out soon.
Yeah, I got 19 books in 24 languages, but my most recent one that's coming out, the one that's coming out on the 5th of August, is this one, Help in a Hurry. And this was written in response to what so many people have been asking me. It takes 63 days to rewire a network, but what do I do in the moment that I'm sitting in a meeting and someone says something that completely throws me off, or something happens with my child, or I'm in a meeting and I get that text, or you catch yourself people pleasing, or you catch yourself thinking in a black and white way, which is, that there's this or this and no in between, not having the possibilities mindset. There were 18 top areas that we found that people around the world and my patients and so on really felt that they what do I do now in this now moment? Because what research shows is that in 63 seconds, you can actually arrest a spiral. So whatever happens to us is going to wire in. But you can literally become a designer of how things wire in. So if you feel yourself moving into, like, for example, complaining or going to react or whatever, you can apply these principles that I've got in this book and catch yourself in that moment, and then before you move on. So that's the idea. And there's some of the things I cover is my brain won't shut up, and I want to punch a person in the face, and help everything seems to be black and white. And I'm just reading from the titles here. Help, I'm tired all the time. Help, my intrusive thoughts won't quit. I hope I don't feel happy all the time. It's those kinds of things that people say, I need help now. And then from there, you can then apply the 63-second thing in the moment, full of tips and techniques of scientifically proven, very simple to read. That's what that one is. And that's coming out on the 5th of August.
I'm excited for it. Dr. Caroline Leaf, where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing?
The easiest is probably through Instagram, Dr. Caroline Leaf. All my social media handles are Dr. Caroline Leaf. I'm everywhere. I'm on everywhere, including Blue Space, I think it's called, and LinkedIn, everywhere, the whole lot. And my webpage is drleaf.com. And you can get the books wherever books are sold. It's on pre-order at the moment. Oh, I also have an app called the Neurocycle app, which is available on iTunes and Google Play. And it's also a web version, and that teaches you the neurocycle as well.
The Neurocycle app. We'll check it out and we'll pre-order the book too. August 5th coming out.
Thank you.
Dr. Leaf, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I loved our discussion.
My takeaway from the conversation with Dr. Leaf was the distinction between the unconscious and the conscious mind, and how first the conscious, all change has to occur first with the conscious mind so that it can impact the unconscious mind, because the unconscious mind is going to influence more daily action. And so I've got to decide what I want to become and commit to it so much with my consciousness that it becomes subconscious. Because once it becomes subconscious, then it's going to permeate more broadly throughout my life. And I think if we can understand that, we can really foresee the impact of belief change with more clarity.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Decidedly podcast. To be notified when new episodes are released, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, drop us a 5-star review, because it helps more people defeat bad decision-making right alongside you. For show notes, decision-making insights, more episodes, and links to resources mentioned in this episode, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com. If you'd like us to help you make a decision, leave us a message at decidedlypodcast.com/makemydecision for a chance to have your question featured in an upcoming episode. For more decision-making content, check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Decidedly Podcast. As always, thanks for listening. This is Decidedly.